I really want to reject the view that the tribunal is showing activist tendencies. It's been a bit of a strategy in multiple countries to suggest that judges are being activists when they're really holding governments to account.
In terms of reviewing the Waitangi Tribunal, I haven't got a problem in reviewing any institution. It's been 50 years. But I would ask the question, why do you want to review it? What are the terms of reference for reviewing it? And who's going to be involved in that review?
It's been 50 years since the government set up the Waitangi Tribunal, a standing commission of inquiry to investigate breaches of the treaty by the Crown, and a special unit to represent the Crown against Māori. In 2018, the United Nations expressed concern that tribunal recommendations are not binding and are frequently ignored by government. While there is no clarity around what any proposed review might look like, one thing is clear. When it comes to the Waitangi Tribunal, power has always rested with the Crown.
The Crown aren't bound by findings of the Waitangi Tribunal, so what are these political parties concerned about?
The tribunal wasn't a piece of magnanimous decisions on the part of the Crown.
Professor Jane Kelsey. She's written extensively on the Crown's response to Te Tiriti and also appeared before the tribunal as an expert witness.
Maturata, who was in the Labour Party at the time, minister, thought that it would be really important to have a space, a safe space in which Māori could be taken seriously in expressing their mamae over what had happened with Te Tiriti and seek some resolution.
It took Maturata 3 hard years of negotiations to get even his own party on board.
And they said they would only agree to it if it would only look at potential grievances after the Treaty of Waitangi Act was passed in 1975. Where they assumed, of course, all the big issues like the land issues and so on would be gone, and there wasn't much to see.
Legislation to establish the tribunal was passed just as the 1975 Land March arrived into Wellington.
If you want to see everyone in New Zealand get a fair deal in retirement, vote National.
The Waitangi Tribunal legislation went through just before the election that Robert Muldoon won. And he was very clear that he had no intention of setting up the Waitangi Tribunal. He was going to have to set up a Human Rights Commission because of some UN treaties that had been signed, and he was going to just put it into there.
But there was a spanner in the works, Ngāti Whātua, right here in the heart of Tāmaki Makaurau. A permit was required to gather kaimoana, but Ngāti Whātua ignored that because they'd never given up their customary right to do so for tangi and hui. Joe Hawke exercised that right, and for that he was prosecuted. He challenged it in the new forum.
And he lodged a claim with the tribunal that meant that they had to set it up.
Joe's claim was heard before a panel of 3. It was very legalistic, with no talk of Te Tiriti, the treaty, or even the principles. His claim failed on a technicality, but Joe and his people were already occupied, up on Takaparawhau. In 1980, Sir Eddie Jury took over as the tribunal chair.
Eddie Jury took the tribunal from where it was with Joe Hawke's claim in the ballroom of the then Intercontinental Hotel back onto the marae.
Following a tribunal inquiry, a portion of land was vested back into Ngāti Whātua. In 1985, Labour passed legislation expanding the membership of the tribunal and giving it retrospective powers back to 1840, a long way from the cut-off point of 1975.
It was an extraordinarily important time, and the tribunal at that time made findings, not often recalled today, that there was no cession of sovereignty from the claimants in the Manukau claim, in the Motunui claim, and the Kaituna claim.
The late 80s and early 90s saw the government sale of assets under threat by Māori treaty claims. The first claim to be settled were the Waitomo Caves. While Waikato Tainui were the first iwi group to bypass the tribunal and negotiate directly with the Crown, historical inquiries were often the starting point for many iwi.
And for Moriori, coming down here and people being able to stand up and tell their stories and their hurts. I was told at school that Moriori don't exist. And it wasn't until the report came out where, the tribunal said it was very clear, even despite everything that's happened to Moriori, they are still a distinct and unique people with this peace covenant still intact. That meant a huge amount to me. And I think it was hugely important for everyone else who gave evidence for Moriori to the tribunal. We all had the same story. We were reclaiming our identity as a people. And I think that is hugely valuable in the context of the tribunal hearings.
Claimants hope the Crown will seriously consider the tribunal report when they start negotiations.
Even though there were very clear and strong findings from the Waitangi Tribunal, it was like ground zero with Te Arawhiti. So we had to actually reprove everything from the beginning, even though we had a substantial report in our favour.
But what the Waitangi Tribunal has done is that it has actually reminded the country of what its true history is, and then tried to guide government after government, in how to fix up what was wrong.
To date, there have been over 3,370 claims registered, with over 130 inquiries completed. There are still over 2,160 claims currently under tribunal action.
And it has collected a vast amount of mātauranga, traditional knowledge, scientific evidence, academic evidence about our colonial history, but also about the contemporary breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
And that hasn't always gone down well either. More after the break. No mai ki te ao with Moana. We're back in 25, looking at the world around us through a Māori lens, connecting the dots across Aotearoa and beyond. The politics, the people, the stuff that affects our whānau. We're here for you. Challenging and celebrating as well, every Monday night on Whakaata Māori. Sir Eddie Jury was the first chair of the Waitangi Tribunal. He explained that in order to get political action, it was suggested that tribunal reports would need to win over the public.
They must see it as a plain injustice, and that government should do something about it. Cabinet would then feel that they are able to do it with public support, that they're not working ahead of the public, that they're following the public. So we had to go out there and write reports that were persuasive for the general public.
10 years after the Māori language petition was delivered to Parliament, Huirangi Waikerepuuru led one of the first contemporary claims on behalf of Te Iwi Māori, for Te Reo Māori.
Ko Te Reo Māori, ko ngā tikanga Māori katoa I pūpuake I roto I tēnei whenua o Aotearoa. Engari, kore rawa e kitea I runga I ngā taonga wakaata irirangi. Tai atu ki te reo irirangi.
The tribunal's report agreed that language was a taonga, and that report created the political momentum to secure the Māori Language Act in 1987, set up Te Taurawhiti, and laid the groundwork for Māori radio and television.
Mo te taha, mo te ako I te taha Māori roto I ngā kura.
Tribunal's role is to look at acts or omissions of the Crown in breach of the principles.
In the case of international agreements, TPPA, climate change, etc., these are all clearly within the kaupapa of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and they are totally consistent with the original 1975 tribunal's jurisdiction.
The tribunal itself noted that the number of urgent inquiries escalated dramatically following the change of government in 2023 and the rapid rollout of treaty-related legislation. Some of those issues had to be heard and reported back on within weeks, even days.
And I think the work that the tribunal has done recently has been very comprehensive, it's been very considered, and it's been in line with its original legislation and with the work that it's done throughout its life.
But it is also the only space in which the feet of the Crown can be put to the fire. And when they don't appear, then that speaks volumes for itself.
It's Parliament versus the Waitangi Tribunal over the latter's decision to summons the Children's Minister because she refused to voluntarily appear or respond to questions. She lawyered up.
While the tribunal summons was heavily criticised by both David Seymour and Shane Jones, the Court of Appeal found the tribunal's action was lawful.
There's a different kind of feel to the tribunal from being in court, I would say.
The tribunal is fortunate in that it can make its own processes. So it doesn't have to act like a court, even though the Crown at times tries to make it into one. And so, on some occasions, for example, they've had a Crown expert and a claimants expert and a tribunal expert, we had this in the TPPA inquiry, go off to answer a series of questions. They called it a hot tub. And come back and see what we could agree on and what we disagreed on. That was a really constructive process.
I mean, all the hearings I've been involved with as counsel, and as a tribunal member, the Crown have been ferocious in their rebuttal of claims. And they put their own evidence forward, and they give the witnesses an absolute grilling, as is their role.
A recent strategic report recommended that the tribunal resist Crown pressure to be adversarial and lean more into its inquisitorial style.
You have the tribunal members sitting at the front, kind of like a big interview panel. So it's focused on the tribunal and sometimes lawyers asking questions of people. What's your experience with this? What's your view of this policy? What impact has this had? Has this prejudiced Māori? And at a recent tribunal hearing that I was at, someone got up to speak and to give evidence, and she was quiet and she was nervous, and she said, I'm not a historian, I'm not a lawyer. And Pākehā member of the tribunal said, I think actually the tribunal runs on people like you, and it works because of people like you. People like you are the lifeblood of the tribunal. This tribunal serves ordinary people across the country, and Māori and non-Māori.
And 9 times out of 10, you see that relief when I've had my say.
I've had my say.
Whatever you decide, Judge, I don't care. I've had my say, and my uri are going to be able to say, our nan, our koro, were there, they stood up for us.
It's really important to remember that the tribunal is actually a Crown entity. It's part of the justice system. And the tribunal has sometimes tried to stretch what it can do as part of the Crown. Quite often what's happened then is that its resources have been attacked, its appointments have been either not made or have been conservative.
Appointments to the tribunal are made on the recommendation of the Minister for Māori Development. Both Māori and non-Māori members are chosen for their expertise and knowledge of matters likely to come before them. The appointment of Richard Prebble and Philip Crump to the tribunal sparked some criticism.
The Constitutional Kaupapa inquiry now, which is going to the very core of the questions of rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga, is initially taking the hearings back to marae.
For now, all power lies with the Crown, and the tribunal has often become a political football when certain interests have been threatened.
The pressure comes, I think, from several directions. One of them is external to the tribunal. What's happening in the external climate that is putting anti-Māori, anti-treaty pressure in on everything. And the tribunal is, of course, up there as a symbol to be attacked. But also those things that are happening become a part of the claims before the tribunal, as we've seen most recently with the principles of the treaty bill. And so the tribunal gets caught also in that space under pressure to make recommendations to governments that have already predetermined that they're not going to listen.
That means the tribunal can find that, as it has done with the Treaty Principles Bill, that the Crown is profoundly in breach of Te Tiriti or Waitangi, and the Crown can ignore that.
Through all of this, though, the tribunal has remained the only place that Māori can go to have a voice against the Crown that forces the Crown to answer.
Because the tribunal places Te Tiriti as a central compass for what we do.
Over the last 50 years, the Waitangi Tribunal has been described as a compass and a toothless taniwha. It's veered between recognising Te Tiriti and Tino Rangatiratanga to talk of treaty principles which affirm Crown sovereignty, and then it's gone back again. It's been a safe space for the Crown and Māori to have hard conversations, though often claimants are left feeling frustrated with the expectation and hope that the Crown will act on tribunal recommendations. One thing is for sure, the Waitangi Tribunal has played an important role in capturing stories, documenting breaches and acting as the conscience of the nation.
I was listening to the former mayor giving a submission on the Treaty Principles Bill, and he described himself as a recovering racist because he had all of these sort of redneck views over the years he was the mayor. He learnt so much about the history and the interaction between Pākehā and Māori and the colonial dispossession by the settler government of Māori from their land and so forth. So I think the tribunal has a lot to teach non-Māori and Māori about our shared history. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should embrace that. We're not responsible directly for the actions of our ancestors, but we can acknowledge those things have happened and develop a better future together. And I think the tribunal has a very important role in doing that.